Have you ever needed to collect the right tools or the right supplies to be able to do a job or to do a project or color or paint or anything? Well, that means you had to be equipped with the right supplies. For example, if you were going to paint a picture, you would need paper, you would need paint, you would need paintbrushes, and those supplies would equip you to do the project. Well, today we're going to hear about how God's Spirit equips us. Now you might be wondering, where are the tools? What does He equip us with? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, we have a remember verse that we need to go over one more time. Are you ready? Acts 1:8 says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." All right, now back to today's part of the Big God story. We're going to hear about two men. Are you ready for their names? Can you guess their names? First one is Peter, and the second one is Barnabas. Now, God's Spirit was going to equip them to do amazing things. And they couldn't just wait for it. They had to ask for it. They had to rely on God and trust in God, and He was going to equip them to do what He called them to do. So if you're ready, make sure you're all ready. We're going to jump into today's part of the Big God story. And then what are we going to finish with? We're going to finish with worship. All right, guys, buckle up and get ready to hear about today's part of the Big God story.
Have you ever been to a different country? I have had the opportunity to go to a few different countries. Now, two of the countries I have had the opportunity to go to is Thailand and Africa. It's so unique to see how different they are, even with how they do candles. So, see, this is a candle that came from Thailand, and look at it on the inside. Now, in Africa, they ended up making a lot of candles that looked like the shapes of the animals that you would see over there. It's kind of cool when you go to a different country. Now, one of my favorite things about traveling is to try the different types of food and see the sights and learn a few of the words in the new language and to see the way that people celebrate all over the world. It's so amazing to see that God has made our world so beautifully different and unique. I think the variety that God created gives Him great joy. Today we're going to hear about a different kind of variety that God created. It's how the Holy Spirit equips us to serve and to live for Him. When we say that God's Spirit equips us, it means that He gives us everything we need to be who He wants us to be and to do what He wants us to do. So, last week in the Big God story, we heard about how God brought a woman named Tabitha back to life and showed that He is the Lord who heals. Now, today we're going to hear about how the Holy Spirit equipped two missionaries, Paul and Barnabas, to tell the many people about Jesus. Let's take a trip back in time. Now, imagine you're in the ancient city of Antioch. You're in a church where something amazing is about to happen. In this church, there are many men who are prophets. Now, a prophet is someone, either a man or a woman, to whom God's Spirit speaks so they can tell others the message that God gives them. God's Spirit equips Spirit-filled believers to prophesy. Well, while these prophets were fasting, which is going without eating so you can pray, the Holy Spirit began to speak to them. They prayed for Paul and Barnabas and sent them off to spread the good news of Jesus in new places. So Barnabas and Paul began their first ever missionary journey. As Paul and Barnabas began their trip, they knew that God's Spirit had equipped them. They knew that they would have everything that they needed. So let's imagine that you're Paul and Barnabas. You're sweaty and dusty from walking through the streets that is bustling with people. They're selling fruits and vegetables and animals. The city is full of people who do not know about Jesus. Paul and Barnabas began to tell people about Jesus. The Holy Spirit equipped them to say what was right, and people's hearts began to change and their minds began to change. Many of the people began to believe in Jesus, and that was so exciting. But then something even more exciting happened. A man who had never been able to walk listened to Paul tell about Jesus. From the time he was born, this man's legs had never worked. But as he listened, he began to believe that Jesus would heal his legs. God's Spirit equipped Paul to see this man's faith. And Paul called out to the man and told him, "Stand up!" And guess what happened? The man jumped to his feet and started walking, and it was a miracle. The crowd was so excited. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. They didn't know what to think, and they shouted, "The gods have come down to us in human form." The crowd decided that Paul and Barnabas were gods. They wanted to offer sacrifices to them, but Paul and Barnabas, they were shocked and they were worried. They rushed into the crowd and began shouting and telling people all about God. Paul wanted them to know that there is only one true God, and he and Barnabas were certainly not the gods to offer sacrifices to. The Holy Spirit had equipped Paul and Barnabas that day. They were able to convince the people to stop the sacrifices. They told the people of God's truth, that there is only one true God. They were just two men who served the one true God. They were not gods. You will never guess what happened after Paul and Barnabas convinced the people that they weren't gods. The crowd that was so excited about the man's legs being healed, the crowd that thought that Paul and Barnabas were gods, suddenly began to change. They listened to some angry men who hated Paul and Barnabas, and soon the crowd wanted to kill Paul. Who saw that coming? Not me. Now imagine that. The crowd thought that Paul was a god, then they wanted to kill him, and they almost succeeded. But you want to know what's really cool? God didn't let Paul die that day. Now, I know if it was me and I had gotten beaten up as bad as Paul did, I would not want to go back, and I would want to go back home. But God's Spirit equips people, and the Spirit equipped Paul and Barnabas with courage to keep on telling people about Jesus. They just went to another town and to another church, and God's Spirit equipped them with courage and determination. Paul and Barnabas were equipped by God's Spirit to go and tell the world about Jesus. But they were not the only believers who were equipped by God's Spirit. If you believe in Jesus, God's Spirit wants to equip you too. Imagine with me that you have a suitcase. Now, how God's Spirit equips us is just like a suitcase. Now, imagine for a bit that you are going to the beach. Think about, what would you pack if you were going to the beach? Now, imagine that you were going snow skiing. Think, what would you pack when you were going snow skiing? They would be two very different things to pack for a beach trip versus a trip to the mountains. But since it is God's Spirit who equips us, it's like he packs our suitcase with all the right things that he knows that we will need. Paul and Barnabas, they didn't know the situations that they would find themselves in, but the Holy Spirit did, and he equipped them. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, they were able to do many great things for God in their missionary journey. They preached the good news, and they experienced the miraculous healing of the lame man. The Holy Spirit also protected Paul and gave him the courage to keep on preaching after the crowd had attacked him and left him for dead. God's Spirit equips them for everything that they needed. And you know what? The Holy Spirit wants to do the same thing for you and me. Whatever you need to live for God, he wants to give you. Because, remember, God's Spirit equips.
Whatever the distance or darkness, you're with me. You're with me. Whenever I'm failing or falling, you've got me. You've got me.